While Metallica were continuing to carve an ever more elaborate niche for themselves, the thrash movement was also continuing apace. The most successful groups would come to be labelled the Big Four.
There's this term used in thrash called the Big Four, meaning Metallica, Megadeth, Anthrax, Slayer, whatever order you want to put them. Those were the upper echelons. And I suppose it's fair to say, and it is simplistic, but it is fair, that for most genres, when they happen, there are four bands who come out of it. And you can probably argue about, well, there are certain genres where it didn't happen, but by and large, that seems to be some form of rule, that four bands make it to a greater or lesser extent.
It was really a journalistic term, but there was good solid reasons for that term to exist. I mean, Metallica obviously ruled the roost in terms of the album sales by the mid to late 80s when this term came about. They were certainly in terms of songwriting up there with the best. Anthrax had a different approach. Not only were they from New York, unlike the other three, they were from the East Coast, but they had this, they tied into the whole skate punk phenomenon. So you saw them wearing like these big shorts. They endorsed Vision streetwear. They posed with skateboards. They did a single with Public Enemy, for example. But they had this sort of cheerful, laughing approach to their thrash metal.
Anthrax, as much as they are given credit for the rap rock hybrid with what they did with Public Enemy, is not respected because of what they did with the singer. And looking back at Joey Belladonna and comparing that to what James Hetfield and what Metallica were about is just, it's almost an embarrassment.
Anthrax were the band who were different to the others because they came from the East Coast. And they started as something of a joke before actually becoming quite a crucial part of what happened. And the reason they're a crucial part is because they did things before anybody else. The first thrash band, the first metal band to get involved with rap, Anthrax. The first metal band to get involved with hardcore, Anthrax. Rap metal and metalcore owe a lot to Anthrax, but when they did it, they were derided. In fact, they were openly slagged off and slaughtered by everyone for being stupid to do that, and how dare they. Probably Slayer remained the most true thrash band. They're obviously known as the greatest thrash band of all time to so many people. Rain in Blood, their 1986 album, is regarded by most people as the greatest thrash album ever made.
I gotta give it to Slayer, like, they are a band that, in a sense, never sold out, even though they'd sold out a lot. They kept it on an underground level and a respected level by their peer, fans. I mean, like the diehard fans we're talking about. When I say the diehard fans, I'm talking about people that jumped on board with the Kill 'Em Alls and that. I mean, if you see the early Slayer, a lot of people don't know this, but I mean, it's like a Pantera in the sense, like real hokey looking. And it was only a couple of years that they got a stronghold as to what they were going to bring forth with the satanic imagery.
Slayer stood apart from the rest of the members of the Big Four because they had an unparalleled aggression, and the violence of the music was just something that none of the other bands could match, not even Metallica really. And the other thing, of course, was that their lyrical approach was all about Satan in the 80s, which is so cheesy to look back on now, but so thrilling at the time and contributed to some fantastic music.
Once Rain in Blood had happened by Slayer in 1986, once the greatest thrash album of all time had been made, where does the genre go? Yes, it's a challenge. Of course, they set a standard. And at the time, I don't believe anyone really thought it was the greatest thrash album of all time. It was just a great record. Of course, it's hindsight that gives it that sort of cachet. However, it was a great challenge. And what started to happen, I think, was, interestingly enough, the better bands in the genre started to feel they needed to move on.
Most notable of this collective in regard to Metallica would be Megadeth. Formed by ex-Metallica member Dave Mustaine, their first release arrived in June 1985, entitled Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good. Interestingly, thrash would now be taking on further influences. Jazz musicians and Megadeth members Gar Samuelson and Chris Poland began to add their imprint to the sound.
Dave Ellison, Chris Poland, Dave Mustaine,
Gar Samuelson,
drums,
guitar and vocals,
bass guitar and background vocals.
You know, I never knew that much about the music until I met Gar I mean, not met Gar, but when Gar joined Megadeth, that's when I started to understand more about that style of music. But it wasn't something that that I pursued, you know. But once I heard it, I realized that it was challenging and musically it was like high energy, and so you know that's what piqued my interest in it. Most musicians are perfectionists, so that's kind of a given. But in this kind of music, any kind of, you know, where the amps are on 11, there's a certain thing you're trying to, you know, a tone that you're going for, and with the drums and the bass and the vocals and everything, there's something that you're reaching for that isn't easily reached, you know? You don't just walk in a music store and buy an amp and go, yeah, now I'm gonna sound like Judas Priest. You know, there's so much time that goes into, you know, learning how to do that and play like that and get those sounds. And no one really knew how to get that kind of bombastic, you know, double kick, you know, and get it to tape really well, you know? So when Randy Burns was doing Peace Sells with us, even Carrot Faye on the first record, I don't think those guys really, I know Carrot Faye, maybe, you know, God bless his heart, but I mean, I don't know if he knew how to get it to tape, you know? So I thought the progression from the first Megadeth record to the second Megadeth record was great, musically and sound-wise. But I think we just hit a wall after Peace Sells because we were so messed up.
Definitely Megadeth has carved their own road. It made some very strong records. Rust in Peace is a very strong record. Countdown to Extinction is, I think, a brilliant record. And lyrically, I think Dave, he's been a good observer of the apocalypse, of mankind's descent. He channels a lot of his own inner unresolved anger into his music.
What I think Dave Mustaine is most bitter about is the money. I think he's pissed that he didn't make as much money, you know, as Metallica, which is, you know, he fucked up. He should get over it. But from what it seems to me, he's not the kind of guy to get over stuff.
Dave definitely has some chip on his shoulder about that whole thing. I mean, when they first came up here, he was more the front man, so to speak, because James was so shy and introverted. And so he kind of appeared to be like the leader of the band. And but I guess from the get-go that they never planned to keep him. I mean, they were looking forward to get another guitarist just because of his drinking. But I guess he was a little bit more of a violent drunk. And there was a couple incidents where he was driving on the road with them and ended up driving them into a ditch while the other guys were sleeping in the back.
I do know what it's like to deal with a belligerent drunk and becoming a hardcore abuser. So I can't really say anything more than, yeah, that's pretty much par for the course when somebody crashes the truck and is blazing drunk all the time and not even there for, you know, the next kind of information or anything they need from him. He was just like...
When I was in Budapest, Hungary with Metallica, that was when the Black record hit the charts. And the fax came in, and I was with Lars in his room when the fax came in. It said that they were the #1 record. And then you just knew that the whole world was about to change. His world, our world. The funny thing about that day in this hotel room was I mentioned to him that Dave Mustaine had called me at 3 o'clock in the morning from America, apologizing to me if he'd ever been an asshole. And I thought it was such an odd phone call. Until later I understood it was the 12th step in Dave's recovery program from addiction. Lars says to me, "Hey, Dave called me last night too. That's weird. He said like kind of the same things." But how odd is that that was 1991 August. Yet years later, maybe more than a decade later, it's obviously still grinding inside Mustaine because that sequence in Some Kind of Monster, where he and Lars are talking about how crushed Dave was to get kicked out of the band. That's, to me, was so telling and really kind of breathtaking in its sense of heart.
Do you have any idea of what I put you through? No. What I went through. I mean, people hate me because of you. You know, I walk down the street and I hear some piece of shit say, Metallica at me, and they do that to taunt me.
Dave Mustaine, you know, formerly of Metallica, or the guitarist, you know, at one time guitarist of Metallica, and they can't seem to avoid that. In a way, you know, we get it with Diamond Head. You can't escape Metallica and the fact that it will say Metallica have covered Diamond Head songs and this, that, and the other. But maybe just struggles to. You know, to come to terms with being kicked out of such a huge band.
To tell you the truth, man, the whole time I was around Dave, I never really heard him talk shit about those guys. Like when we were just around, I think the only time it came up was when someone else brought it up and egged him on, you know, and I wasn't even around for that. I honestly never heard him go off about that.
This new breed of rising competition failed to stop Metallica from furthering their remarkably confident sound. Third album, Master of Puppets, which hit the shelves in March 1986, marks for many the point at which Metallica created their definitive album, as well as transcending their influences to create a sound that was entirely their own.
The focus was just really bang on, you know. Maybe that was just the culmination of that lineup's, you know, perfect moment, really, that album.
For me personally, Master of Puppets is Metallica's best album. It's not a particularly controversial view. One or two younger fans, perhaps fans of other kinds of music, regard their fifth album, Metallica, as their best album, which had a lot of anthemic tunes, got a lot of radio play, a lot of MTV play, and it's a good album for sure. But for me, they were at their songwriting peak in the mid-'80s, and that's where Master of Puppets is. The differences between Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets is that on Ride the Lightning, Metallica had discovered their sound. They'd expanded their horizons, they'd brought together all the elements of the musicianship to create an album that was just, it was them spreading their wings. Now, Master of Puppets had a similar kind of sound, a little bit harder, a little bit more widescreen, thanks to, you know, improved recording budget. They had longer on the recording. But it still has that sort of very epic feel. You know, all the songs are longer, the songs they spread out a bit more. There's much more room for Cliff, for example, to bring in his classical training. And the album as a whole, which to this day is one of the finest albums of all, not just thrash metal, not just heavy metal, of all musics, has everything going for it, everything.
Metallica really had taken up the cultures from bands like Iron Maiden. Maiden had never been afraid to do long songs if they felt it fitted into the structure. Metallica was starting to do that as well. I feel that Ride the Lightning, their second album, freed Metallica from the thrash shackles. Master of Puppets gave them an opportunity to move it forward, and the vast majority of Metallica fans at the time were quite happy to accept it.
I think Master of Puppets is one of the few albums that you can play from start to finish and there isn't a skippable track. People have their favourites. For me, it's Disposable Heroes, which is this kind of grisly war epic. It's incredibly fast, it's incredibly powerful. You know, it stands up to this day. Metallica played it at Wembley in 2007, for example, for the first time in years. There's a song called Damage Incorporated at the end, which is just incredibly violent. The title track, Master of Puppets, is very, it's just epic.
It was one of those one of the earliest Metallica tracks where it has movements, it shifts gears, much like it has a classical sort of foundation. Because the song, it starts so aggressively, and then it kind of goes into that acoustic bridge, and then it returns. I mean, it's breathtaking, that Master of Puppets. Master!